I just want to...
Welcome back to Morning Line. A remarkable in-utero surgery to correct a birth defect has yielded an even more remarkable photograph. Take a look at this. Surgeons were operating on a fetus to close a spinal opening caused by spinal bifida when it appears that the hand of the fetus grabbed on to the doctor's finger.
Don't you love it? It just appears that the hand grabbed onto the doctor's finger like it's a figment of your imagination. But then you can see the MSNBC logo, and it's a wonder that they ever showed the picture to start with. But anyway, you know, just to get back to my story, because to give God credit, I have to share with you my journey. I was 43 years old. I had wandered the world absolutely lost for most of my 43 years. There were 4 of us kids growing up. I have a brother and 2 sisters. My mother and my stepfather were both alcoholics. As I said before, my stepfather was in the Navy, and they were both alcoholics, but my stepfather was a child molester. I was always the first one of his kids to get home from school, and I learned the hard way not to go into the house if he was there. I would run to the alley behind our house and see if his car was parked in the driveway. One day in particular, I'll never forget. He was the local Navy recruiter. It was in Rock Island, Illinois. It was wintertime. I was 12 years old. It was sleeting that day, kind of crossed between freezing rain and a drizzle, but it was cold. I saw his car that day, and I snuck down the alley behind our house. And I sat on the curb at the end of our block, and as the cars drove by, I got sprayed with the rain and the mist and the sleet. And I was shivering, and I broke down, and I just started crying. And I questioned God. How can you allow things like this to happen to little kids? I was mad at God, and I blamed God for everything that was happening to me. 6 months passed before I got the courage to tell our mother what this man was doing to me, and she did nothing. I'm 53 years old. This is back in the 60s. This is a tough time for a mother with 4 kids to be single. I tried to understand, but I can't. The man molested me for 2 years, and at 14 years old, I started running away from home. At 16 years old, I left for the last time. I had completed the 10th grade. I was truly lost. You know, I had to survive. I ended up on construction sites working as a laborer. Nothing wrong with a good hard day's work, but it wasn't my passion. And one day I said to myself, if I could be anything in the world, what would I be? And I just said out of nowhere, I want to be a photographer. And I'd never had a propensity to pick up a camera before. But it's fun to look back on your life and see how God had his hand, even before you recognized him. But I ended up going to Nashville State Technical Institute. A 1-year certificate course in photography is what I got. And you would have thought that I graduated with a master. A 1-year certificate course really wasn't anything, but for me, this little runaway boy, it was everything. And I quit a $12, I had worked up to being a carpenter. I quit a $12 an hour job as a carpenter to work for $6 an hour processing people's vacation photos at a 1-hour photo lab. It was pretty funny. But eventually, I got a job. I got my first big break to work at a newspaper, the Review-Appeal newspaper in Franklin, Tennessee. What a break for me. More country music stars per capita in Franklin, Tennessee than anywhere in the country, even Branson. It was a huge break. 23,000 circulation 3 times a week. It wasn't even a daily newspaper. I worked there for 8 years and won 14 University of Tennessee Press Awards for that newspaper. And then eventually I moved on and I began freelancing for the Tennessean newspaper out of Nashville. It was the 57th largest newspaper in the country. On one of my assignments for the Tennessean, I was sent to photograph a minister of a tiny little church in the mountains of Appalachia. It was the North Carolina-Tennessee border mountains. And they were very, very poor people. But this is a huge break for me because I was just a freelance photographer. And I was getting to shoot a photo story for them. They would fill up pages with my pictures. And I was just so blessed for this big break. On one of my visits to this church and visiting with this pastor, he asked me where I stood with God. And I told him about the things that happened to me as a little boy. And that I was still mad at God. And he didn't give up on me. He kept after me. And I told him that I could never forgive this man for what he did to me. I mean, some things are unforgivable, right? I gave up 43 years of my life learning the most valuable lesson I've ever learned, that to be forgiven, we have to forgive. Nothing is unforgivable. But I finally came to a point in my life. I was reunited with my older sister after I got out of the Army. I was 20 years old. And I didn't realize it. I didn't know. At the same time, I was being molested. So were both of my sisters and my little brother. And none of us knew it was happening to each other. And, you know, if it had just been me, it would have been one thing. But I was the oldest boy. I tried to protect them. And I left them to that monster when I ran away. And it's hard. One of the hardest things for me is to forgive myself. And I think about abortion and the people that have had abortion and all the women that have contacted me. And sometimes in life, one of the hardest things to do is to forgive ourselves. Because if we ask for forgiveness, God gives it freely. I finally came to a point in my life where I was so full of hate that I was consumed by it. I wanted to kill this guy. I just wanted to avenge my brother and my two sisters. Because we're all in our 50s, and they are still so very lost. It's really, really sad. But one night after church services at this tiny little church in the mountains of North Carolina, on my 3.5-hour drive back to Nashville, Tennessee, out of nowhere, I just started crying. And I began to pray for that man that had done those things to me as a little boy. I had to pull off the interstate. I was crying so hard. On the side of Interstate 40, somewhere between Knoxville and Nashville, Tennessee, at 2:30 in the morning, I found forgiveness in my heart and dedicated my life to my Lord and Savior, Jesus Christ. What I call the end of myself. I just couldn't live another day under my own power. And it was such a freeing moment. It just became clear to me immediately that this guy deserved my pity, not my hate. Pity's easy to walk away from, but you can't walk away from hate. Not the way I was. And it's just been such a blessing for me. Wisdom came over me that this guy was so drunk by 3 o'clock in the afternoon that he couldn't tell you what he did the day before, let alone to orchestrate molesting of all of us and never not having any one of us know what was happening to each other. I call it the absence of God, the only condition required for pure evil to run rampant. And it sure did in this guy. But within 3 months of my profession of faith, it seemed like yesterday to me, I came to the point and I said, Jesus, please, I've made a mess of my life. Use me as you see fit. And within 3 months of this profession of faith, I received a call from USA Today to photograph this incredible assignment on operation on children still in their mother's womb. At 9:30 on the morning of the surgery, I met with Vanderbilt University Medical Center Public Relations Director John Hauser in the lobby of the hospital, and he took me to a room in the surgical suite where the surgery would take place, and he briefed me on where I could stand and how incredibly dangerous this surgery was. This surgery did not save the little unborn child's life. It was experimental surgery in hopes that the child would have a better life, but it also endangered both lives. So it was very controversial. Samuel was the 64th ever operated on in this procedure. After waiting in this room for hours, John Hauser, remember he's head of PR at Vanderbilt, he brought Robert Davis into the room I was waiting and introduced him to me as the reporter from USA Today that would be writing the story. This is a picture I shot in the hallway before the surgery. This is a picture of Julie Armos. This is Samuel's